Have you ever wondered what someone says after walking away from one of the most famous marriages in rock history? Angela Bowie kept quiet for years, letting rumors, headlines, and other people's stories shape her public image. As time passed, the truth she held onto only grew heavier. When she finally opened up, her words reshaped how many people saw the man behind the legend. What she revealed was not polished, not softened, and not what most fans expected. Keep watching as we uncover what Angela Bowie finally said after divorcing David Bowie. Early years and family background. Angela Bowie was born Mary Angela Barnett on September 25, 1949, in Ayios Dometios, a village then in British Cyprus. Her birth took place while her family lived on the island because of her father's work. Her father, George Milton Barnett, was an American who had served in the U.S. Army and later worked as a mining engineer. Her mother, Helena Maria Gallas Barnett, was Canadian and had an artistic side. Angie grew up in a household that mixed military discipline with creative influence. Her family moved around when she was a child. That meant Angie attended schools in different countries. She had formal schooling in Cyprus, then in Switzerland, and later in England. Those moves exposed her to a range of cultures at a young age. She remembered Cyprus as part of who she was and often described herself as Cypriot by feeling, even if that was not a legal nationality. Her upbringing included a Catholic background. Angie had one older brother who was many years older than she was. The age gap meant she spent part of her childhood with adults more than with peers. Her parents stayed together for many years and, by several accounts, had a stable marriage. Both of her parents later died in 1984. Those family ties and losses have shown up in interviews and in the memoir material she has published. As a teenager, she left Cyprus and eventually moved to England in the late 1960s. She enrolled at Kingston Polytechnic in London, where she studied and began to build a social life that mixed creative interests with the music scene. London in the late 1960s was loud and busy. For a young American woman who had lived in different countries, the city offered work and chances to meet people connected to the music industry. Before she became a public figure, Angie briefly tried studying in the United States. She attended Connecticut College for a short time. Her time there ended abruptly when she was expelled after an affair with another female student came to light. That episode appears in several biographies and in Angie's own accounts. The incident pushed her back toward Europe and the London scene, where she would later meet David Bowie. Her early work life mixed office jobs with chances to meet artists and record people. She found work connected to record labels and public relations. That is how she came into contact with a number of musicians and industry figures. A few sources say she worked at Mercury Records. Those roles put her close to people who were building new sounds and new styles. Her presence at record company events and parties helped her make the connections that would change her life. Angie's background, the child of a military father and an artistic mother, raised across several countries, gave her a mix of bluntness and showmanship. She learned to adapt fast. She had an eye for style and for striking an image, skills that later fed into her role in the early days of glam rock. Her education in different countries gave her a practical advantage. She could move between social circles and adjust her voice to fit a room. That was useful in a time when fashion and music were shifting quickly. Her roots also shaped the way she told her own story later on. In memoirs and interviews, she put forward a plain, direct tone. She wrote about her childhood, her parents, and the moves that marked her early years. She wrote without hiding the messy parts, including family tensions and the awkward moments of growing up abroad. Those details helped readers and fans see her as more than a public figure. They showed a person who had learned to take risks and to speak up. family history continued to matter after she became known. The fact that her father worked in mines and ran a mill during his career placed her early life in a working world that valued order and resilience. Her mother's later life creativity and older maternal age when Angie was born also added layers to the family story. These elements appear in profiles and in Angie's own retellings. They give context to her decisions later in life, how she moved fast, pursued visibility, and took jobs that put her in the public eye. By the time she met David Bowie in London in 1969, Angie had already lived an unusual life for someone so young. She had shifted between countries, seen different schools, and tested the limits of social rules. That background set her up to make bold moves in her personal life and in the cultural circles she entered. The mix of a disciplined family base and a taste for the arts would stay with her as she moved into the public spotlight. Meeting David Bowie and the rise to public attention. They met in London in 1969, when both were still finding their places in the city's music world. Angie Barnett was young, bold, moving through clubs and record company circles after arriving from Europe. David Jones was already trying different names and styles, chasing a sound that would break out. A mutual contact in the record business introduced them backstage after a gig. From that first meeting, they clicked fast, not in the safe, slow way people write about in films, but in a loud, restless way that matched the noise around them. Their courtship was public, in a way a steady, private romance rarely is. They went out to clubs, to shows, to parties where musicians, managers, and writers rubbed shoulders. Contemporary accounts place them dancing at the Speakeasy and turning up to King Crimson and other shows together. Angie fit into the scene by bringing an eye for fashion and an appetite for attention. David fed off that energy and pushed his own experiments further. By the end of a short year, they were living together in Haddon Hall, a rambling building in South London that became the kind of shared, chaotic home young artists often occupied. Lots of friends, long nights, and constant work on songs and image. They married on March 19, 1970, at Bromley Register Office. The wedding itself was simple, but its effect was larger. It fixed their names together in public records, and it made Angie part of David's life in a way that press and fans could follow. In later interviews, Angie said the marriage happened for practical reasons as much as emotional ones. She has described it as a step that allowed her to work and to be officially connected to someone whose life was changing fast. The truth of their feelings was complicated from the start. Both have since described their bond as unconventional and open. But the marriage did mark the beginning of a decade in which both would move from small club circuits toward bigger stages and headlines. From a publicity point of view, Angie's timing was sharp. She knew how to use a look or a line to get photographed, and she loved the circus that followed headlines. That blunt style fit the emerging glam world. Clothes that shocked, hair that made a statement, and performance that mixed music with clear visual cues. Several writers and interviews credit Angie with helping shape some of David's early-stage persona and visual ideas, not always in precise, catalogued ways, but through constant input, rehearsed provocations, and a willingness to push boundaries. She later claimed influence over costumes and image choices that fed into the Ziggy Stardust era. And while historians disagree on how much credit to give her, the claim itself made headlines and kept attention on the couple as David's music changed direction. The years that followed their marriage were a swirl of recording sessions, club support slots, promotional work, and fashion experiments. David released a steady stream of records while trying out different stage names and backing bands. Angie was rarely out of the picture. She attended shoots, talked to journalists, and acted like a human magnet for photographers who needed a face to pin to the story. That presence mattered in the small ecosystem that creates stars. Record companies and managers noticed when an artist's partner could hold camera attention or steer conversation away from routine product talk and into gossip that sold magazines and opened radio doors. In those early years, Angie's appetite for media and her blunt, candid tone made the couple a more interesting story than many of David's contemporaries, who often kept a lower profile. As David's music reached a wider audience, the pair's private life bled into the public record. Their home hosted other musicians and figures in the scene. Their social calendar read like a who's who of early 1970s rock. That created two effects. One, it gave David quick access to new sounds and collaborators. The network of friends and lovers made ideas move fast. Two, it turned Angie into a recognizable public figure in her own right. Magazines printed her opinions and quotes. She wrote and spoke in a way that never tried to soften the edges. That kept her name on pages, even when David's record sales were still modest. Conflict and spectacle became part of the rise. Angie later described an open marriage, drug use, and volatile nights that historians and memoirists took as evidence of a relationship that was creative but unstable. Those same stories, when they surfaced in interviews or memoirs, served to brand the couple as dangerous and exciting. A label the press loved, and the record-buying public proved willing to reward. In that sense, publicity worked both ways. Personal chaos fed attention, and attention pushed the music into rooms it might not have reached otherwise. When the Ziggy Stardust persona appeared and the glam rock curtain pulled back, the image the world saw had been partly shaped by the grind of those early years. Dressing rooms, late-night arguments, and the social networks of London clubs. Angie's role was not only in clothes and gossip. She was also a constant presence who took interviews and wrote about the life she shared with David. That meant people who wanted to understand Bowie's sudden rise often read her side of the story. Her memoirs and interviews later gave a clear, often unvarnished account of that time, and those accounts kept their place in the Bowie story even as other narratives formed. By the mid-1970s, David Bowie had moved from club favorite to international star, and Angie was moving with him through that shift. Her visibility and willingness to court controversy did not only reflect her personality, it also shaped how press outlets presented David to the public. For fans and journalists trying to map how Bowie became Bowie, the couple's public life provided an easy and print-friendly narrative. Two young outsiders from different backgrounds, living in a creative pressure cooker, trading influence and controversy until one of them exploded into fame. Whether every anecdote about who suggested what costume or which line in a song was true matters less in cultural memory than the fact that Angie's presence changed the texture of David's early publicity and helped build the noisy stage for his larger breakthrough. Personal life, relationships, and family. Angela Bowie's personal life has been as public and as messy as the headlines that followed her. She married David Bowie in March 1970 when both were still finding their footing in London's music scene. The wedding was quick and practical. Angie later said the marriage helped with work permits and that the relationship was unconventional from the start. They had a son, Duncan Zoe Haywood Jones, born on May 30, 1971. That child would grow up to be the filmmaker known today as Duncan Jones. The marriage lasted through the decade of the 1970s but ended in divorce on February 8, 1980. The split carried legal details that have been discussed in many accounts, including a sizable settlement and conditions around public comment. The couple's private life rarely stayed private. Angie has described their early marriage as open, and both she and David moved in social circles where drug use, late nights, and affairs were common. Those facts appeared in interviews and in later memoirs and became part of the public story of their time together. Reporters, biographers, and friends added detail over the years: fights, dramatic nights out, and a pattern of behavior that mixed creative collaboration with volatility. This combination made their marriage difficult to maintain and created long-running tensions after they separated. After the divorce, custody and contact with their son became a sensitive point. David Bowie was granted custody of Duncan. Angie moved on in her life, but also later spoke about periods of estrangement from her son. Over time, the relationship with Duncan was complicated. Public interviews and profiles show that the split affected both mother and son in personal ways, and that they worked through difficult feelings in different ways as Duncan grew into his career. Despite past estrangement, Duncan has acknowledged his roots and his place in a complicated family story that involves fame and privacy. Angie's romantic life did not stop with David Bowie. She had other relationships and marriages in later years, and she continued to court publicity through her work and public appearances. In the decades after the divorce, she lived in several countries and took on varied projects: modeling, acting, writing, and occasional television work. Those activities kept her visible and gave her platforms to tell her version of events. She published memoirs and took interviews that were blunt and often provocative. Those books and pieces aimed to control the narrative she had lived inside and to explain why she behaved the way she did while still young and caught up in a rising cultural wave. Family always remained a key part of her story, even if the family shape changed over time. Angie came from a mixed background and was used to movement and reinvention from an early age. That flexibility helped her adapt to public life, but it did not erase the emotional costs of separation from a child or the fallout of a high-profile divorce. She has written about the pain of losing day-to-day contact with her son and about the emotional distance that followed. Those admissions changed the tone of later interviews. Where her younger public voice had been sharp and provocative, her later reflections often show regret and a desire to explain herself to people who only knew her from gossip columns. Angie also faced legal and financial choices that shaped her family life. Reports on the divorce settlement suggest she received a substantial sum and that the agreement included terms about publicity. Some sources say a 10-year clause limited what she could say about the marriage in public. Whether that agreement fully shaped her later willingness to speak is hard to prove, but it added a formal layer to what was already a personal and emotional split. When the gag period ended, her memoirs and long interviews became best chances to lay out her side of the story. Those accounts reveal both small domestic details and broader claims about influence and blame during their marriage. Parenting in the shadow of fame brought extra complications. Raising a child when one parent is on a global trajectory is never simple. Angie has said that she and David had different approaches to upbringing, and that those differences played a role in their split over custody. The record shows that Duncan spent much of his childhood with his father, and that he later carved out his own path in film. The long-term effects of those early choices are part of both Angie's and Duncan's public narratives. Interviews with each suggest a story that is not simply reconciled or resolved, but that contains periods of distance, reconciliation, and private negotiation. Beyond the immediate family drama, Angie's personal life has been marked by performance and self-presentation. She learned to use media attention to build a brand, sometimes leaning on controversy to stay visible. That approach brought both criticism and opportunity. In later years, she kept finding outlets that paid attention: talk shows, magazine pieces, and occasional TV appearances. Those moments fed the public's appetite for more of the story and kept Angie as a recognizable figure in the Bowie myth and in wider pop culture. At the same time, they raised questions about privacy, responsibility, and the cost of living life in public. Career work in fashion, media, and writing. Angela Bowie moved through fashion, media, and writing the same way she moved through life. Fast, visible, and willing to upset expectations. She never stayed behind the scenes for long. From the moment she stepped into London clubs with David Bowie, she treated style like a tool. Clothes, hair, and posture were ways to say something before speaking. That sense of dressing to be noticed led to steady work in modeling and to roles in small acting projects. Photos from the 1970s show her as a figure who could hold a camera's attention, and that helped open doors in magazines and on television. Her public voice rose quickly in part because she chose to speak. That decision pushed her toward journalism and books. Angie published memoirs that pulled no punches and promised insider views of the music scene and her life with David. Her most widely known book, often titled Backstage Passes, collected first-person memories of fashion, late nights, and the kinds of encounters that read like raw material for films. The book stirred attention because it mixed name-dropping with clear, direct anecdotes about the decade. That frank style made the memoir sell and kept readers curious about what else she would say later. Writing did not stop at a single memoir. Later in life, Angie kept a public website and wrote blog pieces, interviews, and essays that returned again and again to the themes that had built her brand: style, survival, and telling her version of events. Her official site lists several titles and makes clear she still sells signed copies of her books. That shows she treated writing as a continuous project, not a one-time stunt. The blog posts and site updates also present her as someone who still wants to shape how the story is seen, rather than leave it to other hands. Television and talk shows were another place she landed. In the years after her marriage ended, Angie accepted interview slots and appearances on programs that wanted a blunt, opinionated guest. She understood that television could amplify whatever headline she wanted to make. Appearances ranged from late-night talk shows to recorded interviews about rock history and personal memory. Video clips and archived interviews show her talking about Bowie, fashion, and the highs and lows of the scene. TV kept her name in public conversation and fed interest back into her writing and public appearances. Modeling and image work fed into each of the other parts of her career. Fashion photographers used Angie because her look fit the tone of glam rock without copying male or female templates strictly. She blended masculine and feminine notes in clothes and makeup in ways that fit the era's taste for androgyny. That look mattered for magazines covering the music scene and the wider pop culture press. While she never became a mainstream catwalk star, she did become a visual signifier in press photos and magazine spreads. That visibility mattered when she wanted to launch other projects, such as short film work and stage appearances. Acting and short performance projects show the same pattern. Angie often chose roles or appearances that kept her in public view rather than retreating into private life. Her credits include small film and television parts and some stage work, usually in projects that matched her persona. She also tried music and recording on occasion, capitalizing on the overlap between pop culture performance and celebrity. Those experiments rarely shifted her primary identity as a writer and public figure, but they did give her new places to be seen and new audiences to reach. Her career choices sometimes caused friction. Critics accused her of trading on scandal and of being too willing to serve up sensational details about her marriage. Supporters argued she simply owned her story and refused to let silence be the only option. The dispute mattered because publicity was one of her main tools. When she wrote or spoke bluntly, editors printed the pieces because readers wanted inside detail. When she stayed quiet, attention moved elsewhere. That push and pull between controversy and craft is central to how she managed a career after the marriage. Beyond books and TV, Angie moved into personal brand work. She did public appearances, book signings, and interviews across different countries. Her official shop sells signed books and memorabilia, and she used live events to keep a base of fans engaged. That work fits a model now common to many public figures. Persistently create touchpoints where fans can connect directly. Angie used those touchpoints to retell scenes from her life, to argue her side of disputed stories, and to stay part of pop culture conversations. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, make sure to give the video a like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more content.